Hey everybody, it's Marty, and it's time for Cartoon Tuesdays. This week I will be reviewing the awesome cartoon series Reboot. So Reboot is essentially a series that's set within a computer. So it's essentially, well, when you think of Reboot, you think of, well, what it's like inside of a computer. There are sprites, there are guardians, there are viruses, and there are a bunch of other things that go on within this city. And essentially, the main crux of this series is focused on this guy, Bob, our main character and current guardian of Mainframe, which is the city that everyone lives in. So, Bob is essentially the person that's there to protect everybody from viruses. There's also Dot, who runs the diner, and she does other stuff relating to like politics and things. I never really paid attention to that. Not that she wasn't an interesting character, it's just, you know, we don't get much intel on what she actually does, and that's kind of confusing. Then we have my favorite character in the series, Enzo, the classic kid character, but he has a very interesting backstory. Now, I'll be going through the entirety of the series, so spoiler alert. Seriously, spoiler alert. If you don't want the series ruined for you, go to Amazon or go online and watch the entire series of Reboot. It's only 4 seasons. Check it out. Anyways, so the main focus of this series, aside from Bob protecting everyone from viruses, is that games come into the city. Now, games can be both good and bad things. Instead of entertainment like they are in our world, games in their world are essentially, well, they're games. You know, you try to win them, but they mean so much more. Because if you lose games, then that means some of your city is going to be destroyed, partially. That's why Bob goes into the game so that he can, well, he can help any sprites that were caught inside, and so that he can, you know, just save the day, as usual. And this usually goes on. This is essentially what goes on throughout the entire first 2 seasons of the series. Then we reach Season 3. And Season 3 has a massive change-up, because half of Season 3 is essentially the same stuff we saw in Season 1 and 2, Bob saving Mainframe from virus attacks and games, until the best, well, it's essentially a 2-parter in my opinion. So what ends up happening is the lead female character, Dot, ends up missing for a little while. And it turns out that this virus, not the same virus as Megabyte or Hexadecimal, this virus has been capturing people and essentially sucking their life force. Eventually, he breaks free of where he was hiding and ends up going into this tear, which is essentially, well, it's sort of a tear in space, which essentially can be turned into a portal or turned into something so much worse. So when the virus flies into the tear, it essentially turns it into a portal to the net, where all these crazy creatures start coming out of and attacking the entire Mainframe. So everybody has to work together to close this portal to the net, and to make everything all hunky-dory again. Which means that Bob has to work with his main nemesis, Megabyte, and also Megabyte's sister, Hexadecimal. Are you following me so far? Anyways, so after this giant battle ensues, even with Enzo being given the special, I don't know what to call it, but he's essentially given the code of the Guardian, which allows him to become the new Guardian if anything ever happens to Bob. Yeah. So what ends up happening is when they finally seems like they're winning against the monsters and they're sending them back into the portal, Megabyte does something really not cool. He ends up throwing Bob into this circular ship and shoots him into the portal, which ends up closing it up for good. Also, he crushes Bob's key tool, which is essentially the tool every Guardian uses, that gives him the ability to do amazing things, like create fans, he makes a guitar, it can essentially do anything that he asks for. That's mechanical, in a sense. So, what ends up happening after that is, because Enzo is the only one that could take up the position of Guardian, even though he's so young, he does that. And that's essentially what the rest of Season 3 is. And a lot of bad stuff happens. Let's go. With no real Guardian to protect Mainframe, Megabyte does a lot of shady shit and some bad stuff happens. I would put in clips at this point, but I have no idea how to do that. In any case, so after that, Enzo has to take up being Guardian, like I said. And he does a pretty good job for a while, up until the last episode of Season 3, in which he goes into this game that he simply cannot win. It's essentially this sort of tournament style, this tournament style game, which essentially has him going up against many Mortal Kombat-esque characters. Even Enzo's Reboot uniform itself looks a lot like Scorpion. So, yeah, kind of stuff. He ends up losing to the main villain of that game, which is Satan, of all people, to be perfectly honest, kind of surprising. And it ends up leaving him defeated. Now, instead of being turned into a null, which is essentially what happens to all sprites that lose games, his friend Andrea, who was originally a game sprite, that copied herself and put herself on Enzo's icon, which allowed her to make a copy of herself to exist outside of the games. She ends up helping Enzo turn into a game sprite temporarily by tapping his icon, which is what every sprite uses to gain items, abilities, and clothes to prepare them for games. Anyways, after that point, we have a big, well, not a really big time skip, but yeah, pretty much a huge time skip into Season 4. Now, Season 4 has a massive change, in terms of characters. See this? See how happy they are? Boom. No, wrong. This is what Season 4 looks. Now, Enzo's been turned into a renegade because he's been traveling through different games trying to find Mainframe. And he ends up getting so sick of traveling through and starting to never believe that he's ever going to see Mainframe again, that he gets more and more angry and gradually turns into this. A goateed, one-eyed thing, because I didn't mention he loses his eye in that battle, in that game that he loses. In any case, yeah. And Andrea. This is her adult form. I don't have an image of her kid form. So, eventually they run into the pirate villain from one of their episodes in Seasons 1 and 2, who has eventually turned into a good guy, and he'll take them home. After that point, they end up running into Bob in the net. He was still okay, who has turned very different compared to his original look. His hair is a lot longer, and eventually Bob fuses with what remains of Glitch, since remember, Glitch has essentially been crushed by Megabyte. And, things get better, essentially. Eventually, they end up getting home, in which leads to the confrontation. Matrix, yes, he calls himself Matrix now. He doesn't call himself Enzo anymore. Matrix ends up taking on Megabyte in a one-on-one clash. Fists and blades and awesome stuff. Seriously, you guys need to watch this series. It's freaking awesome. Anyways, after that, it turns out that Megabyte, while he's had quite a few years in Mainframe by himself, has actually set up essentially a contingency plan. So after he's defeated this contingency plan, is essentially set to destroy all of Mainframe as well as all of our main characters. However, main man Bob has essentially used his new powers to sort of reboot the entire system of Mainframe, which essentially takes away every single thing that was bad about Mainframe. Like, it destroys it destroys Megabyte's tower, but in a surprise twist, Hexadecimal actually turns into a good guy, so she doesn't get erased by the reboot. And everything is nice and happy, and Season 4 ends... Wait, Season 3, sorry, it was still Season 3, I'm sorry, it just, mixed up. Season 3 ends up ending with a nice recap of all that's happened from the end of, from halfway of Season 3. Until Season 4, which is, in my opinion, not that great. Now keep in mind, I still love Reboot, it's a fantastic series, but Season 4 was just kind of a disappointment, at least after a while of waiting. So what ends up happening is, we also meet this new virus, called Damon, who is essentially a much stronger virus than Megabyte. She's able to take over like people's minds and essentially corrupt them to her will. And her will is essentially that she wants to destroy the entire universe that Reboot exists in. Every single person, every single thing. But that turns out to go high because, well, Matrix stops her. I'm sorry, that's just, like, there's really not much to say. You really gotta see the movie for yourself. And I think I will stop it there. There's one more movie in the mix, but honestly, I will not ruin that for you. What I'll say right now is, however, that this series is one of the best series that has ever been made. It was great animation, and overall, it's just an awesome series. Seriously, if you haven't watched it yet, pick it up. Pick up the DVDs. I think they haven't been released on Blu-ray yet, so yes, the DVDs. They're both awesome. Anyways, that's it for now, so I'll see you later. Damn, long-ass video.